And now on WRS, Michael McKay with the McKay Interview.
Hello everyone. I cannot seem to avoid COVID-19. It's around me and you, I imagine, all the time. Or so it seems. I'm back addressing it again, though this time from a different perspective, from the perspective of business. And I'm in Geneva today. In the world of COVID-19's impact on businesses and organizations, cliches abound. Rather like in former times, the Roman Catholic Church, and to a lesser extent the medical profession, hid behind Latin so as to control the narrative, to use another modern cliche, so do management consultants. Perhaps I'm being a little unfair to colleagues listening in who might be in that profession, no offence intended. I'm trying to cut through all this jargon over the next half hour, and by using straightforward English with the help of an old friend and colleague who knows about these things, to explain what COVID-19 is doing and will do, at least for the foreseeable future, to the thinking of those who lead and the thinking of those who manage businesses and organizations. In other words, new ideas. I make deliberate use of both words, businesses and organizations, because COVID-19 has had huge effects on both. For example, the airline industry, fewer people are flying, and the recalibration of some NGOs because donations have been badly reduced, to mention just two extreme examples. My guest today is Karel Leeflang, an old friend and colleague who set me thinking the other day in a conversation we had over a very good lunch when we talked about the new normal at 1.5 meters social distance, of course. His bread and butter is in leading large-scale transformations, both as a corporate executive and advisor. And in describing what he does, jargon words and phrases like global organizational efficiency and effectiveness programs and productivity improvement solutions feature prominently. He has his own firm called StrategyPod, focusing on advisory, analytics, and digital solutions. Apart from the time when he and I worked together in Geneva years ago, he's also worked for Barclays Bank, Cadbury Schweppes and Unilever, and has consulted across a wide range of business sectors. And you'll learn more about him as we talk, and we will all learn a lot from him today. Hello, Karel. Thanks for making time for me today to have this conversation. It's really good to see you again.
Hello, Michael. Look forward to our discussion.
I've got loads of questions, Karel. I'm not sure we're going to get through all of them, but let's just jump straight into it. Karel, what do you call these times, these COVID times, and what should we call these times? And does it really matter what we call them from a business and organizational point of view?
Oh, you get me going there. I read a lot about the new normal, and I'm almost allergic to that. I think the new normal, there's nothing normal about what we're going through today. I think we've seen, and we are seeing increasingly profound changes to the way that people buy products and goods, to the way that customers react, to the way that we make products and services. So I think there's nothing normal about what we're experiencing, and I don't think that we're going to quickly return to anything that is normal. So I'm not sure that it really matters enormously, but personally, I prefer something like new reality.
New reality?
Yes.
That's the expression you use.
That's the expression I tend to use, simply because we're constantly confronted with change and changes, and therefore we need to adapt from where we are and constantly try to find ways of adjusting to those changes.
Okay. Let's go straight to the nub of the issue. What does COVID-19 mean for companies and organizations, and how they organize themselves? And what do they need to do to survive and thrive? And here's the question, is survival enough?
Well, survival is the first step, I guess. But if you think about an organization or a company, they are normally built for stability. That's the way that we've constructed society. It's the way that we've constructed companies. So when you think about it, this environment, which has massive amounts of uncertainty, is really challenging us, and it's challenging that stability. It's making people feel uncomfortable. It's making customers changing the way that they buy goods and services. So there is an environment that is constantly shifting, and that puts particular pressure on leaders. How do you explain to your organization what is going on, how you are adjusting, and survival in that context is simply not enough. So it is helping people understand how you as an organization interpret the changes that you see around you, how you're going to adjust to that, and how do you help people understand what their role is in that adjustment. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is that when you live in an environment that is extremely uncertain, how do you interpret that uncertainty? So you need to be scanning for data, for information. You need to look for trends at a much higher frequency than companies were used to in the past, so that you can sort of read the tea leaves much more frequently and you get much more information from what's happening out there. So that puts particular pressure on people that work with information and data. And then thirdly, the most important part, it starts with people and it ends with people, your employees. This is a very difficult environment. I was with a client the other day and the third floor was closed because they had 5 employees with COVID. This is creating unease, it's creating uncertainty, but it's also making people feel sometimes not knowing what's coming next. So helping employees getting used to change, helping them understand the changes as you as an organization, as a company see them, and helping them excel and feel safe in those changes is probably one of the biggest challenges of today.
And the focus of your remarks seems to be more on the employees, the staff, the management, excuse me, than on the customers, the marketplace outside. Or have I misunderstood you?
No, I think both are important. But if your employees feel unsafe, if they feel confused, if they feel cynical, if they feel uncertain, then your customers are going to feel the difference in massive ways. So at the end of the day, I think it was Richard Branson who always says it starts with your employees, otherwise you'll never get to your customers. I think that's very much the case, and today is much more important.
Okay, we're not just talking about commercial enterprises, are we? Entities as different as airline companies and NGOs with charitable status are in difficulty these days. How much does the type of activity affect the way that leaders, executives and managers have to behave in order to thrive in these extraordinary times? What about the type of business?
So it's clear that different sectors and different types of organizations are affected in different ways. But I think the reality is that everyone is affected. If we think about pharmaceutical or medical companies, most of them have done really well as a result of this pandemic. But what we also know is that most pharmaceutical companies are putting all their effort into battling this COVID pandemic. And as a result, research for other diseases has suffered. Medical equipment and medical devices are all aimed at helping people get better from this awful disease. So in the same time, other equipment are suffering, and projects that are developing other equipment are as a result suffering. So I don't think you can necessarily say no one is, one sector is affected and others are not. I think everyone is affected. And in Switzerland, we're home to a large number of NGOs, and I think that's a very particular area. Public spending has exploded in 2020. And as the sponsors of many of these NGOs are governments, I think NGOs, we need them more than ever, but they're going to have real difficulty in getting the required funding. And they'll need to think about strategic partnerships. They'll need to think about doing more with less. And I think that's going to be a particular challenge going forward.
That's a good expression, doing more with less. So what does survival entail? Let's just go into that a little bit more in detail. To plan, to implement, to execute, to build, rebuild. Can you break down into practical ways so that I can understand the picture of what needs to be done more clearly?
Yeah. So the majority of organizations and companies in the past, when they look at the future and when they plan for the future, what they tend to do is they look at what they've achieved in the previous years, and they look at where they see 2 or 3 additional opportunities, and that basically creates the plan for next year.
This will be a 3 or 5 year plan.
Exactly. It's an extrapolation of what you did in the past. That no longer works. You see profound changes to your customers, profound changes to your supply chain, the way that you make your product or service, and profound changes to the way that consumers look at your product and service. So you can't really do the previous year plus a little bit. You need to reconstruct. And on top of that, there's a massive amount of uncertainty. So companies really need to create what I tend to call scenarios. So maybe a concrete example here, if you take the airline industry, will business travel in the next 2 to 3 years recover to 25% of what it was before the pandemic, or 50%, or 75%? Those are three very, very different scenarios. And the shape of your company and what you can achieve are very different under those three scenarios. But having those three scenarios and working through them, what that then means for your company and what you would expect from your customers is absolutely critical to actually drive that forward.
It's good. Sorry, it's good that you mentioned the airline industry, because in a way it brings me on to my next question. In this brave new world for business and organizations, does size matter? I mean, airlines have different sizes, whether it's a British Airways or a small airline that's flying across the Alps or whatever. How critical is size, or are there other important issues that we need to be aware of?
I think that's a
survival sense.
Yes, it's a really good question. I think in many ways, smaller companies tend to find it easier to adjust. There's, in a way, less to change, if you will. So size matters to some extent. But I think the determinant factor is what I like to call culture. So I'll give you a very concrete example. You remember at the beginning of the epidemic, there was a massive shortage of protection equipment, of disinfectant, and all the hospitals and medical facilities were scrambling to get as much of this stuff. And interestingly enough, Geneva-based Firmenich, they closed down their factory, or a large part of their factory, and within a week they were capable of making disinfectant for the medical profession here in Switzerland.
So just to be clear, they had to close down because of the lockdown, or
no? They decided.
They decided to close down.
And I think that's a clear example of leadership taking a really bold decision. A group of managers and employees with enough can-do spirit, prepared to go in there, experiment, and make disinfectant. I honestly, personally, don't know how difficult it is, but it's not a product that they normally would make, so they're making something that they've never done before, and within a week they're up and running and they're creating loads of disinfectant. What is interesting is that some of their competitors have tried to do the same thing, and it's taken them 3 to 4 months. So that's my point around culture. It creates safety for people to experiment, it creates can-do spirit, and I think companies that have that strong culture and that where that translates into can-do and where that translates into speed of decision making and where that translates into people feeling safe to experiment, those businesses will survive and they will thrive. Whereas companies that have not put the effort in, and that they will find this really, really difficult, and some of them might even be extinct.
So you mentioned the word culture. So let's look at that just for a few minutes in the context of language. Buzzwords. Do they really help communication? I hear all the time words like, from a management consultant, and I'm not getting at you, alignment. This is the new, reset. Dashboard, that's another one I've been hearing about. What does all that really mean in simple English? Come on, Karel.
Okay, so to be honest, there is a little bit of BS there. And, it is true that, as management consultants, as strategy consultants, we're all trying to find language. It's the big reset, it's the rebound, it's this, it's that. And at the end of the day, in itself, it doesn't matter that much. But I do think that when you think about an organization, language matters tremendously. It is really important because it creates definitions. So when you use, even if it's a buzzword, when you use language that means something to your employees, to your customers, to your suppliers, and people feel that that language is used in a genuine and authentic way, I think it is extremely important because it helps people understand what's going on. And I'll give you an example of the contrary. Having worked in human resources in large companies for much of my career and doing transformation and restructuring, I've seen so many ways that people effectively talk about layoffs. And I really dislike that. We reshape, we repurpose.
Or ineffectively talk about layoffs as opposed to effectively.
Come on.
I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
Call a spade a spade. Yeah. The reality is that when you're restructuring, people are not stupid. They know that that's what's happening. Tell them that that's what's happening. Exactly. Treat them like adults and be genuine and authentic. And I think that's something that's very important, particularly when the going is tough and when there's a lot of uncertainty.
But let's continue that point. This is the language of communications. I mean, from what I've seen from some top management consultants, they seem to prefer words that are aggressive and combative. For example, I've read words like warfare and criminal over the choice of a more reassuring or thoughtful word. Why do you think that is? Is that cultural, or am I being unduly sensitive or even unfair?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Some of it's clearly aimed at a commercial argument, trying to create a momentum, trying to create a sort of the world's on fire, you need to put out the fire. But I think when I speak to my peers in the strategy consultancy space, I think many of us have a real, genuine concern that a lot of organizations are slow in responding, ineffective in responding, and some of them even talk about, well, it will return to how it was before.
Slow in responding to this particular crisis,
Yes.
This pandemic crisis
Yes,
we're in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I personally really don't think that it's going to return to where it was before. And I think wait and see is one of the most dangerous things that companies can do today. Respond, even if you don't know what the future means, you do need to formulate a response, because otherwise you're going to end up with confused people, confused suppliers, and confused customers, and no one's going to win in that zone.
So that takes me to my next question. Let's delve into the detail a little bit about and talk about the future. How does a company plan for the future in times of uncertainties? And if you can give me some concrete examples of what you see. You mentioned Firmenich and what they've done, but give me some other examples about how you plan for the future when you don't know where the rocks are underneath the sea, so to speak.
Yes. So one real nice example that I saw is a company that makes a nice product, doesn't really matter what it is, but they saw significant change to their customer base. The customers were buying different products, they were buying their products at different intervals, and they were asking this company for different actually types of product that they were not making before. So they set out and they created 3 scenarios of the future. Don't know why they ended up with 3, but as we were working with them, that seemed to be the right number. And what they spent a lot of time around is, what were their assumptions? So we are, if you translate it into the airline industry, we are assuming that 50% of business travel will return in 2022. That's an assumption. So they created a number of those assumptions and then decided what their preferred scenario was and created an implementation plan. But they took that one step further, which I thought was something that we talked to them about, but it was courageous to do that. They shared those assumptions and 3 scenarios in great detail with their sales force. And then they started to ask the sales force to scan for these assumptions. Because at the end of the day, that's all they are.
To scan? What exactly do you mean by that?
Look at the marketplace.
Yeah, okay.
So we are assuming that 50% of our customers will be more interested in product A than in product B.
Right.
And they asked their sales force to verify that, to scan their conversations with the customers. And interestingly enough, we were reviewing this program a few weeks ago. Regularly, salespeople will come back and say, listen, boss, actually what we are seeing is it's not 50%, it's only 30%. Should we make an adjustment to our plan?
But Karel, sorry to interrupt you, but there's an element of surprise in your voice. Isn't this normally the case?
Often it isn't.
No?
No, it isn't. Very, very many sales plans are made as a point on the horizon. At the end of the year, we need to have sold 1,000 units. That's our plan. What you're seeing today is you're constantly adjusting your plan. So we said we were selling 1,000 units, but the market is telling us it's only 750. However, in this other area, it's not 200, but it's 700. And how do you adjust to that? It has implications for your supply chain, has implications for the products that you need to be able to give to your customers, has implications for your whole organization. The ability to do this quickly is very, very important. And what this company did particularly well is they involved employees that normally aren't involved.
So now let's talk, because this is moving the way that I wanted to examine some of these issues. Let's talk about skills and people. In this brave new world of COVID-19 and post-COVID, let's hope, what are the needs of people, Karel? How are highly skilled less skilled and blue-collar workers affected by this brave new world? And what is the social cost of throwing semi-skilled workers on the scrap heap as economies contract while allowing skilled, knowledge-based workers to engage with their laptops, their tablets, and work from wherever they want while sipping their avo lattes? That's a word I just learned recently. Aren't these real management dilemmas that require a collaborative approach together with governments, trade unions, other important players? And what does your experience tell you about that, Karel?
So that's a multi-layered question.
It's a big question.
Let's maybe start with very senior roles. So what we see in very senior roles in our organizations is they need to be much more people-centric. They need to be much more authentic. So they really need to be able to reach out and connect with people. And they need to be able to almost adjust their style to different people.
Are you talking communication or policies or both? I mean,
it is
when
a
you say
combination
much more,
it's a combination of communication, it's a combination of listening, and it's a combination of adjusting your style to help people understand what the direction and give people the direction that they need. So I think there's a real pressure on leadership where we've moved from command and control over the past 2 decades to something that's a little bit more collaborative, but we're far from where we are. I think the pandemic has created enormous pressure on leaders, and what we'll see is a whole new generation of leaders that are much more people-centric emerging, and unfortunately, a group of leaders that can't make the cut. Middle management, I think we'll see some very pronounced changes. Their roles will need to become much more accountable, and they'll need to get much better at making those quick changes to plans, making those adjustments happen, and feeding back what the frontline staff is hearing from customers, and feeding that back and making sure that that leads to the top decision makers. The bottom end of organizations, I hate using that language because that's where the real work is being done. We're seeing 2 things happening. We're seeing an acceleration of the introduction of technology and automation, and that's going to hurt a lot of people. It's also going to create a massive amount of jobs, but those new jobs are typically for different people than the people that are losing their jobs.
Massive is a very strong word to use, Karel. I mean, is it going to be that noticeable?
Our guesstimate is that it's probably anywhere between 15 to 20% of so this is important. Companies that are in manufacturing, that are in industrial manufacturing, they're all exploring at an accelerated pace the introduction of robotics, automation, etc. And that means that many jobs in factories will go away at a much higher rate than we've seen pre-pandemic. So yes, this is a real problem. And I think on one hand it leads to much more efficiency. It also leads to more resilient organizations because many companies got into trouble when confinement happened. They suddenly didn't have the workforce available to make some of the products and services. But at the same time, I think there's a collective responsibility for the leaders of big companies to say, well, if we are taking this number of jobs away, how are we helping people reskill themselves? At the end of the day, these people, they're like you and me. We're consumers. We're buying products and services. And if we're making large numbers of people long-term unemployable, that's a collective responsibility. And I think one of the good things of the pandemic is that we have a heightened awareness of some of the social impact of the things that we do as a company and things that we do as a society.
My guest today is Karel Leeflang, founder of StrategyPod, and we're looking into the near future of how companies and organizations will need to adapt to changes brought on by COVID-19. Karel, let me just pick up again on leadership, because that's a topic that always fascinates me. Under the extreme pressure of these pandemic times, how do bright leaders and managers avoid groupthink and being persuaded that a new way of doing things is effective and cool when it could be just a case of Hans Christian Andersen's Emperor's New Clothes syndrome? I mean, you know the classics. I mean, you've read them. The Bay of Pigs disaster back in '61 in Cuba, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, the shuttle Challenger disaster in '86, and the Enron Arthur Andersen scandal in 2001 too. Leadership style played a key role in that, didn't it?
It did. And the list of that is very, very long. At the end of the day, when there's a lot of uncertainty, people need to experiment. That's the way I like to look at it. You need to try new things because what you did before is not working. And to do that, fundamentally, employees, suppliers, customers, they need to feel safe. It's only when you are safe that you can be creative, that you can do your best work. And to do that, leaders play a key role. So organizations that are able to do things quickly, that are creative or more creative than their competitors, are without exception organizations that have created a lot more safety. So safety is, and the ability to create safety is probably one of the most important leadership traits for the long-term, foreseeable, everlasting future.
Tell me, Karel, I read somewhere recently, one of these sort of management blogs that I just happened to see online. I read that, according to the writer of the blog, that effective leaders get things done quickly. My question is, do they? How about building consensus and pulling your team with you? Doesn't that take time? To bring about radical change, it can't be done by fiat, can it?
No, I don't necessarily agree with that fact. I think effective leaders, they help their teams get things done quickly.
So by doing things through other people willingly.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the reality is that most of the work is not done by the leaders of organizations. They set out the big paths, they set direction, and therefore their ability to help other people do their work as well as they can and better than that is what determines, that makes the real difference.
Karel, I'm conscious of time, but let me just close with this, again, rather large question, but give you a chance to give us your views on it. I know that you're not in the prediction business, and I know you're not a fortune teller, but please paint a few scenarios, I use that word again, of where you think these three important sectors might be, could be, in 5 years' time. And I give you these, and I just picked them at random. The automobile sector, cars. Okay? The international travel sector, however you want. You pick and choose which bit you want to talk about. And the energy sector. Just explain why you believe these, how they'll change over the next 3 to 5 years and where they'll be.
Yeah. So automobiles, I think, super interesting. One of the things we've seen is an enormous decline in the sale of cars in general. But at the same time, we've seen a substantial increase in the sale of electric vehicles. I think that's going to continue. The second thing we are seeing is that people are using their cars much less than they used to do before. So I think one of the things we will see is that people probably buy less cars structurally and hang on to them longer. The third thing that I think it was already on the rise, but the pandemic has accelerated that rapidly, is that things like car sharing, mobility solutions, I think we're going to see that radically improve.
And in the data that
increase.
in the data that you see, is this trend already showing itself?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Enormously,
Yeah.
enormously. And, you know, what we're also seeing, apparently here in Switzerland, there's a shortage of bicycles. You can't buy a bicycle at the moment because everyone is, you know, many people have bought bicycles.
I've got two in my garage
Yeah.
at home. Maybe I should get them out.
So after this publicity stop. No, but interestingly, I think you know, people are changing the way that they're looking at transportation. With people working at home more frequently, they might use the car less, or they might decide that if they're going to the office maybe only 2 days a week, why not simply take the tram or the train rather than sit in traffic? So I think automobiles, we're going to see a substantial change, and the automobile manufacturers that are unable to adjust their propositions to customers are going to be in real trouble.
And now the international travel sector, what do you see? What do you see when you look at that?
Well, I think most companies and organizations have realized that the amount of travel that they did post-pandemic is absolutely not necessary. You know, 90% of companies managed to go to basically home offices in less than 2 weeks. So the reality is that I think we're going to see a lot less business travel, and not only companies themselves are going to have sharper criteria. I think many executives just say, you know, I don't actually want and need to be on an intercontinental flight every other day. That's not necessary. So we're going to see less travel. On the private front, I think many of us have just experienced the country where they live, the environment where they live, and realize how little they really know about the direct
So
environment.
these sort
where
of
they live.
staycations is the word, isn't it?
Yes, I think that's not very glamorous and it's not very fair because there's so much to offer. You and I have both lived in different countries, and very often, when you live in a country for a short period of time, you see a lot of people that are there as an expatriate or as a temporary resident. They really go to all the museums, they go to the galleries, they go and explore different historic sites much more than locals do. So I think we get to appreciate the place where we live much more. So I think the travel sector, it's going to be different, and those differences are going to mean a redistribution, but hotels, bed and breakfast, restaurants, it will come back, but it will be different than
Has
it was
huge
before.
implications for the south of Spain, south of France, Greece, the Mediterranean, and beyond that.
Exactly. So I think local will be a theme that will be important in every sector. And then finally, you talked about the energy sector.
Energy, yes.
We already saw a massive movement to green in every sector, but green energy and alternative energy is something that has really taken off. We've seen the implosion of the large oil companies. All of them are now suddenly putting emphasis on green energy, alternative energy sources, and I think that can only be a good thing. And the thing that's different now is consumers are asking for it, and companies that decide not to predominantly look at green energy sources, they're actually going to be hurt. Customers will just boycott them. So I think...
How strongly do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah.
They'll vote with their feet, literally.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Deeply believe in that.
Yeah.
And, that will not happen overnight, but over the next 2 years, that's what we're going to see.
Karel, thanks so much for sharing these illuminating ideas and thoughts. I found the conversation absolutely stimulating and invaluable. My guest today has been Karel Leeflang, founder of StrategyPod. Thanks again, Karel.
And thank you very much. Really enjoyed being here.
That was the McKay Interview with Michael McKay. And don't forget, you can hear that interview again on our website, worldradio.ch.